Everything's always alright in Amsterdam, the chillest city on earth. But there was one problem, for me at least, and that was the food situation. There was nothing low calorie, low fat, healthy. It was an anorexic hell. There was no way I could up that food without everyone in the restaurant hearing. So Ash became my guide to eating. It had been so long since I'd done it normally, I had no idea anymore what or when or how much a normal person ate. It felt so good not to care, to take a literal vacation from my disorder. But then I remembered the mushrooms. They were the perfect cure for my misery, right? The shrooms were dragging me into a 5-hour introspective nightmare that would change me forever. So hello you wonderful human of the internet, and welcome back to another chapter of the Nostalgia Project. If you have missed the previous chapters, as ever, I will link the playlist below, but it is not super important that you saw them. You will be able to keep up, because tonight we are off to Amsterdam for the very first time. This was the vacation that pretty much single-handedly cured my eating disorder. This vacation and subsequent events. And something to mention is that back in these days, because this was 2005, so in 2005 weed was not legal in like anywhere other than Amsterdam. Amsterdam was the only place you could go and legally buy weed, and also mushrooms were legal in Amsterdam in those days too, which is something that does also play into the story. I left you at the end of the last chapter with a little bit of a cliffhanger in that this friend Ash was about to try and take his own life, although it wasn't really a cliffhanger because I'd already told you where his future went and the fact that we were friends for a good number of years. But the way he got saved was kind of a weird story. So the final thing I need to say before we begin is obviously a mild trigger warning for eating disorder related stuff. It's not a severe heavy trigger warning, as most of this was recovery oriented. It was all the stuff that was battered into my head with realizations out of the blue that forced me towards recovery. However, I do need to warn you that the realizations that pushed me towards recovery on this vacation, they were not these cutesy, fluffy, uplifting, inspirational quote recovery meme stuff. They were brutal, harsh, and really unpleasant and hard to hear. And for me to tell the story properly, that's exactly how I've had to deliver them. Therefore, if you are kind of delicate towards your eating disorder being criticized and to being called out in that kind of way, you may find this a hard video to watch. Therefore, I have left a timestamp in the drop down if you want to just skip over the kind of harsh realization bits. And with that said, this chapter is simply called Amsterdamage. Anna, here goes. Ash didn't die. Obviously, you already know where his future led, and it wasn't into a casket at just 23 years old. But saving him had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with his psychic mother. Just as he'd found something in the house that looked like it might bear his hanging weight, the bar in the ancient, beautiful antique cabinet I used to keep my clothes in, if I recall correctly, Ash looped the rope over, and his phone started ringing. It was his mum. She demanded he come over right now, stay the night, fucking demanded it, and wouldn't take no for an answer. I already told you about Taylor, Ash's mum. Highly strung, expensive, prone to losing her shit at maximum volume. But I never knew she was psychic too. It took Ash by surprise just as much when he told me that story. They hadn't even spoken in days. His mum had no warning signs to pick up on, but somehow she just knew, right down to that very final second. So Ash did as he was told, took the noose off his bloody idiot neck, spent the night safe at his family home, and in the morning, everything seemed more manageable. That was 17 years ago. He's still alive today, has spent his life parading on stages, exploring jungles, seen half the world. What a waste it would have been if his life had have ended then, while he was still that skinny, confused, lost boy. Just shows you what acting on gut impulses about your loved ones can do, can produce, can change in the world. Anyway, Ash told me all about that, but he never told me what pushed him over the edge. What took him from the perma-depressed but coping guy I'd always known into willing to end it all, now and forever. Was it me, getting with Ricky, or is that just a narcissistic delusion? I hope it is, but I suspect we didn't help. Whether he knew or not, though, Ash didn't hate me. Maybe it would have been healthier if he had, but that just wasn't Ash. He needed people too much, and he would always forgive anything of a friend. Our lives were so different now, with him turning over a new leaf and going sober, but we still had everything in common. Our friendship was deeper than those surface level activities. It was a vibe, an energy. We vibrated on the same frequency, and when you find someone like that, someone so bone deep comfortable, almost nothing can break you apart. For me, though, the raver honeymoon phase was still going strong. I'd picked up a moderate speed habit by then, but we're not talking meth here, not back then in the UK. It was only amphetamine sulfate, which is far less harsh, and I was only snorting it. Nonetheless, it made me paranoid as all hell, and I didn't even realize it. It wasn't like an anxiety-based paranoia. It was worse. I had an entire belief system. It was this delusion that my friends were bugging my clothes, their houses, my car, whenever they saw me, so they could watch me whenever they left the room and listen in while I was talking to myself in the car. What a narcissistic fucking delusion, right? Whenever I went to visit their houses and they left the room, I'd give the corner of the ceiling a middle finger flip off, just so they knew I was onto them. I couldn't see any bugs, didn't even look for them, because I thought they could be as tiny as specks of glitter just casually rubbed off on my hoodie. Maybe they were even invisible. No amount of logic could dissuade me from my madness. In my eyes, there was no getting away from these sinister, invisible listening devices, so the best you could do was tell them to fuck off occasionally, just so all the people around you knew you were wise to them. Utterly nuts, I know, and thank God I never told anyone face to face that I knew what they were up to. I didn't even realize how mad I was going until years later when I'd stopped doing all of that, and I looked back one day and went, fuck me. I genuinely had amphetamine psychosis for a while there. Crikey. So there was the speed, there was a bit of coke, which for the time being I mostly viewed as overpriced and overrated. But the main thing was always the ecstasy. That was the special sauce on my life. The thing that really kept me afloat, the pin my life spun around. And of course, there was my eating disorder. I'd made the decision to up my calories slightly when I started doing E on the regular because I was happier. I'd finally found something that made me happy and I wanted more energy for the weekends. But I still had to be in control and I still needed those massive, debilitating binge purge sessions. But they say vast oaks spring from tiny acorns, that the fluttering movement of a butterfly's wings can set in motion a tornado across the world. I think it's probably true. Everything huge starts with something tiny. My life changing started with just another late shift at work in the skate park's booth an hour before closing time. I was slurping coffee, snorting speed, dancing around to Nam Nam Baloo as I hectically polished and repolished the fridge, swept the floor, then read some newly released Harry Potter while leg twitching fast enough to levitate. That was when my phone rang. It was Ash in a bit of a flap. He explained that he was off to Amsterdam for the weekend, leaving tomorrow with Harry, one of his old school friends, only Harry had just realised his passport had expired and there was no way of getting it fixed in time. So would I be able to come instead? Could I just drop everything tomorrow to jump on board a plane to Amsterdam? You cheeky fucking git, I thought. How dare Ash book a holiday to Amsterdam, the place we'd talked about visiting so many times, and never even think to invite or even inform me? This betrayal was clearly a travesty the fates could not allow. That ticket was coming my way, no matter what Ash did. But could I just drop everything tomorrow? Work? Sure. Everyone knew I didn't work weekends, just the same as Rasta Mark didn't work weekends. Weekends were our fucking priorities, and if we couldn't party, we would shrivel up and die. But I did have commitments, of a sort. There was a house party tomorrow night, one of the infamously fucked up affairs thrown by my sometimes weed dealer, always friend Ruben, an autistic oddball you either loved, hated, or were totally baffled by, and there was no way I was missing out on what very likely could be the party of the year. Ash said he could work with that. He'd arrive in Amsterdam tomorrow, and I'd get there the next day. 2 full nights of drug-addled bliss awaited us. So that was the plan. That was genuinely my brilliant plan. Eat ecstasy all night at Ruben's place, immediately followed by boarding a plane on 5 minutes sleep, then launching into the whirling hallucinogenic madness of a weekend in the dam on a fucking come-down, and nothing could go remotely wrong. When I arrived at Ruben's that Friday night, it had the electric, crackling aura of a 1980s squat party. Kids stumbled in and out of rooms in various shades of intoxication, and anyone was welcome, so long as they paid their entrance in drugs, beauty, or both. The buzzing crowd was eclectic in the extreme, from cuddle puddles of 19-year-old raver kids massaging each other's shoulders to this bizarre mid-40s guy no one actually seemed to know, who was parked right in the middle of the kitchen, stuffing and smearing a kebab into his mouth, around his beard, and down his t-shirt, all while animatedly talking to the wall about how great that kebab was. You always used to find the real party, the real weirdos, in the kitchen. Unbreakable rule, I swear, no matter whose party it is, the calm, sensible ones, they just park their asses on the living room couch and they sit there nattering about dull things, while all the restless people, be they wild souls or simply packed to the eyeballs with drugs, get up and fidget about, then wind up in the kitchen for want of anything else to do. Finally, you end up with a crazy collection of neuroatypicals and gurning pillheads laughing and dancing and talking about all the shit that really, really matters in the world. The kitchen is always where the real scene can be found. But that kebab-munching, wall-talking dude was a step too high for all of us, so one by one we grabbed another of Ruben's fresh-baked hash brownies and slithered off into the main party room. Ruben was one of those people who could concoct a scene, a party, a wild time, anywhere he went. Not just because he had enough pot in the house to smoke up half of Birmingham, but because he had this perfect radar for interesting, like-minded people. And once you set that radar dinging, you were Ruben's friend for life, whether you liked it or not. I never knew how to make friends, but Ruben just pulled me into his orbit, and pretty soon we were hanging out every Wednesday, watching South Park and smoking up, or lying in his sunlit garden chatting shit. And Ruben was so weird himself, he never criticized weirdness in anyone else. One time I arrived with a candle, a kebab stick, and a bag of marshmallows, and proceeded to toast and eat the entire bag one by one over the flame of my tiny tea light until the whole house smelled like caramelized marshmallows. Ruben didn't say a single word besides, "That's a really cool idea." My other eating disordered habit back then was to cook low-calorie noodles, then throw in an entire pack of fat-free cream cheese, creating what genuinely looked like a bowl of the grodiest vomit known to man. And still Ruben didn't mock, belittle, or ew at my food choices. Even the time I'd lived on speed, pills, and almost no sustenance at all for an entire weekend, and proceeded to pull a massive, embarrassing whitey, passing out on Ruben's front doorstep, he still didn't mock me. He just fed me bread, then drove me the 300 yards to the train station to make sure I got there safe. These days, Ruben lives in London, and I'm sure it's a better fit for his huge personality and eclectic people collecting habits, but I really, really fucking wish he'd never gone. Ruben was the friend everyone needs in their life. Anyway, by about 1 a.m, several party participants had headed out into the garden to whirl fire poi around their heads, which was an activity I could not even bear to watch. The combination of flames, intoxication, gothic hairspray, and those wide-legged flap in the wind 2000s era trousers seemed a recipe for fiery death balls and lifelong trauma. So I spent the night getting to know this gorgeous dark-haired girl called Anna. We were both rolling and got so glued into our conversation, massage and togetherness that when I went to the bathroom, Anna came right in with me and squatted over the edge of the bath so we could pee in unison, keep on chatting, the music pounding up through the scuffed wooden floor. Finally, round 4 a.m, I remembered that I was actually meant to be packing my suitcase and leaving the country in a scarily small number of hours. So I said my goodbyes and whooshed off through the grotty nighttime dereliction of Aston, down the main vein of the city centre and back to my room, my blacklit haven, where I threw on some music, smoked up another joint, and danced around as I threw the final items into my suitcase. By the time I left for the airport, the euphoria of those pills was wearing off, replaced by a sense of tweaked out, dizzy horribleness. The day was glaringly bright. The airport was so loud, so sterile, too vast, and I hated every moment of it. My pupils were still huge in spite of the sunlight, and the idea of going for a weekend in Amsterdam without speed had been such a daunting idea, I'd shoved a wrap of the stuff into my bra. Yeah, you heard me right. Your resident dumbfuck was about to attempt international drug smuggling while pink-haired, clad in last night's rave pants and staring at everything with 1,000-yard disco pupils. The other passengers on the shuttle bus avoided me like the fucking plague. I clearly looked mental, but I got through security without a hitch. Maybe I was just so obviously a drug tourist, they figured no way in hell would anyone trust me to be a mule. Perhaps I had a bit of stuff on me, but I wasn't going to be some major score with a kilo of fish scale coke up my arse. Why even bother with the strip search? They just let me on through. But that doesn't mean you should try it, ever. I fucking hate flying, by the way. It's a grotesque aberration of nature. And you can feel it every inch of the way, like your organs are still down on the ground, or they fucking want to be, and the rest of you's just rattling around in this sardine can, being flung from landmass to landmass by literal freaking explosions. And every few minutes my brain always likes to remind me, there are hundreds of miles of empty air right under your feet, you know. At any moment you could plummet to your fiery death. And once my brain says that, I can feel it, the nothingness, the abyss right under my feet. And then I think way too much about Final Destination, that bloody awful plane explosion dream scene. And that's the loop that runs through my head the entire time I'm in the air. I take benzos for long haul these days and sleep the whole thing away. In my wildest dreams, someday I would love to be rich enough to fly first class and get absolutely blotto on champagne. I swear those people are the only ones who actually like or can even tolerate flying. But I survived, landing at Schiphol Airport and rapidly locating Ash, who was full of beans, insanely excited by his solo night of Amsterdam exploration. He was always great at that stuff, though he didn't even know it yet. We were both so young, pre-travelling era. But Ash could map out anywhere and find the cool stuff within minutes. That aerial in his head, the thing that picked up the vibes of anything cool light years before the rest of the world. It still worked, no matter where he landed. He'd practically worn down the heels of his Converse high tops just pounding the pavements last night, working out where everything was, and thank God for that, because I have no internal compass and Amsterdam is a nightmare to navigate. The place is laid out like it was webbed by a crazed spider on a crack binge. Just look at any map. And all the streets basically look identical, with a whacking great canal down the middle, lots of quaint little bridges, cobblestones of Victorian lampposts, lethally silent cyclists whooshing in every direction. And speaking of directions, don't fucking bother. The street names are incomprehensible to the English tongue. They all basically look like Udenburgen-Vorgenstrasse, but are even harder to say aloud. I stuck to Ash like glue, knowing I'd be lost here for all eternity if he disappeared for even a second. Like every young Amsterdam tourist ever, I was awed, nearly speechless, by the concept of a cannabis menu. The way you could walk into any coffee shop you liked and peruse their laminated sheet of sativas, indicas, and various types of hash. This was before the tobacco smoking ban came in, and everything was still maximum chill. No one had to go outside to smoke anything, bearing in mind that European people, we roll our joints with tobacco and weed. And the coffee shops were these fuggy, cozy little places full of beaming smiles and reddened, half-open eyes. Coffee shop wasn't just a cover either. The coffee was genuinely delicious, and always, we learned, served with a little biscuit on the side and a tiny, tiny little spoon. I really wanted to nick one of those spoons, because the smaller your eating utensil, the longer a meal lasts. Typical eating disordered shit. But Ash refused to steal from people who were so cool. He was mostly on a quest of hash testing that first time, and the hash in Amsterdam is the most gorgeous smell in the world. It's not green and herbal like bud or dirty and cheap like the crap hash you get in England. It's soft, fragrant, with this deep brown narcotic perfume that makes you think, I bet opium smells exactly like this. And you can taste that deep, spiced gorgeousness on your tongue, and after that, everything's all right in the world. Everything's always all right in Amsterdam, the chillest city on earth, unless you're crossing the road. The roads are goddamn death traps. Ash developed the Amsterdam chicken walk, then sold me on it. You had to sink into a nervous half-crouch, whip your head left, right, while scampering madly in and out of the traffic like a bug-eyed Hunter S. Thompson until you'd hopefully reach the other side without going splat. We were utterly in love with the place from the very first second. But there was one problem, for me at least, and that was the food situation. On the first night, I'd eaten a tin of low-calorie tuna pasta that I'd brought from home, and Ash had tolerated this bizarre and stinky hotel room supper with maximum grace. But the next morning, that was it. I had nothing safe left to eat. We headed into the city centre, and I was banking on finding some fruit or a salad somewhere. But Amsterdam just isn't that kind of city. There were endless bakeries with their waffles, donuts, pastries. There were the Chinese restaurants on every corner, the fast food places with their rotating hot dogs in on-street microwaves. Anything and everything to instantly appease the munchies, but there was nothing low-calorie, low-fat, healthy. It was an anorexic hell. No one wanted that shit here. No one cared about my anally retentive crap while they were stoned or tripping. We walked and got hungrier and hungrier. Finally, we did the only thing we could do and went into one of those Chinese restaurants. Sitting together at a small table, I nervously browsed the menu and found absolutely nothing acceptable. There was no salad, no watermelon starter, none of the anorexic staples you'd find in an English restaurant of that era. But I couldn't make a fuss, could I? We were in Ash's dream city, and he was so alight with love for the place, the culture, the weed, and the new faces and fresh adventures. We were laid back, backpacking European tourists now, and there was no room in that identity For stupid little prissy white girl concerns like calorie counting and low-fat options, it would have wrecked the entire vibe, maybe even wrecked Ash's entire view of me, if I'd taken my ED baggage and just tossed it onto the table between us right here and now in this bloody restaurant. We both abhorred people who made scenes in restaurants, the way my dad and Ash's mum both did. We'd grown together over endless tales of their restaurant dramas, and we knew full fucking well the staff spat in your food, or worse, if you pulled that crap. So, what was I meant to do? The waiter came over. Ash, relaxed as ever, ordered a smorgasbord of chow mein and egg fried rice with a full fat Coke on the side. The waiter turned to me, and I couldn't do it. I simply could not be that whiny, neurotic, boring, vacation-spoiling whinge priss. No way, not an option. So I ordered boiled rice, a prawn curry, and Diet Coke, like I was a normal person. Satisfied, the waiter walked away. I excused myself and went to check out the toilets. They were tiny and right through the wall from where we were sitting. I was not a quiet purger. There was no way in hell I could throw up that food without everyone in the restaurant hearing, particularly Ash. Fuck. I went back to the table and accepted my fate. I was about to eat greasy Chinese food and actually digest it. But when the meal came, it was okay. Better than okay. I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten with a friend. The warm sense of camaraderie that came from conversing with hot food in your belly. And this was Ash. Ash made everything okay, always. I watched how much he ate. He pretty much cleaned the plate, and he was still skinny, wasn't he? This meal couldn't be a death sentence, so I ate nearly all of it, and there wasn't even time to dwell on that or feel shitty about that, because we were off, back onto the streets, headed towards another coffee shop, another menu, another type of hash. And pretty soon we were so baked I didn't care about any of it anyway. It felt so good not to care, to take a literal vacation from my disorder. Given there really wasn't much choice in the matter, I resolved to keep on going, keep it up, just while we were here in Amsterdam. It was only 2 days, after all. That couldn't do me too much harm, and besides, what other choice did I have? So Ash became my guide to eating. It had been so long since I'd done it normally, I had no idea anymore what or when or how much a normal person ate. So whenever he ate, I ate, and whatever he had, I'd have similar. Right down to the pastries. And shit, does Amsterdam do good pastries. My favourite was always this thing that looks like a UFO with an almond on top. It's basically a flattened donut with marzipan in the centre, and it is an oversized handful of sex for your tongue, especially when you're stoned. The weekend flew by, made all the warmer and cozier for the food that wasn't just in shop windows, it was in my stomach, filling me with actual energy, actual vitality. I barely even touched the speed I'd brought with me. All too quickly, we were due to leave. The final purchase I made was a box of Golden Teacher magic mushrooms, fresh, to bring home, because my stupid little 20-year-old ass hadn't bothered to research the legality status, and as such, both Ash and I believed fresh shrooms were legal in the UK. No problem to bring through customs. It was only the dried ones that got you in trouble, right? No. This was the case in Amsterdam back then, but as for the UK, bullshit. They'd changed the rules years ago, making shrooms of any variety a Class A drug. Oblivious, I threw them into my suitcase, making no attempt to hide them, and we headed off to the airport, about to attempt international drug smuggling for a second time. Flying with Ash was way better than flying solo. His airport custom was always to buy a copy of Viz, that wonderfully facetious, dark little comic. Then we'd cackle over it so hard my brain couldn't remind me on a loop about the miles of empty air beneath my feet. Back then, Viz had this character called Anna Rexick, who was this skeletal mess with bloodshot bulging eyes and fingers constantly dripping with lumpy sick. She was perhaps the least politically correct or sensitive character on Earth. But this was the year 2005, still slithering about in its slew of 90s heroin chic models, its Y2K anorexia obsession, half the world's population stuffing itself with stackers and celery in an attempt to wear low-slung hip-hugger jeans without a muffin top. Every guy in the Western world had dated a girl like Anna Rexick. Ash clearly thought she was kind of hilarious, but he didn't want to show it till I laughed too. And I did. There was nothing Viz could piss take about bulimia that the girls on the skinny place hadn't already done twice as hard. And besides, if you can't laugh at your own dysfunction, what the fuck can you laugh at, especially these days? At Birmingham International, having blessedly, miraculously, thank God, got through customs without those shrooms being detected, Ash and I parted ways. It was painfully weird being Ashless. Friday night's come down was kicking in full force as I drove down the motorway with Annie Would I Lie to You playing, and the car had never felt so empty. Ash always felt like my conjoined twin when we were together, and we'd been together night and day every second of a weekend that felt much longer, much fuller, our first holiday abroad with friends, not family, another huge cherry we'd popped together. And now I was alone again, truly alone. My family were on vacation too, all week. So the only company I had now was my nutty new dog Presley and our wise old cat Tessa. The silence of the house was every bit as deafening as Presley's bellowing at his own reflection in the darkened windows that night. The next day was even more depressing. I woke up and instead of aromatic espresso coffee with a biscuit on the side and a wake and bake session with Ash, I was back to reality, back to my old routine. Back to starving myself. I immediately fell back on my usual form of comfort, stuffing my face with donuts and ice cream, then vomiting it all back up again, but it really didn't help. I didn't feel better. I felt worse, bleaker, more alone, more bored in this empty house, the party come down swirling with post-vacation blues, combining to form this sense of utter rootless alienation. But then I remembered the mushrooms. I'd never tripped before, not on anything. I'd never done my research either, and all I thought I knew about shrooms was that they were giggly, soft, and funny. I'd see a lot of cool shit, laugh my ass off, and have a beautiful day. They were the perfect cure for my misery, right? What a fucking fool! Shrooms are one of the most introspective hallucinogens out there, taking you deep, deep down into your own soul, making you stare into that mirror until you can no longer deny your own lies. Never, ever, please take shrooms when you already feel terrible. The start point sets the destination, and my start point was sticking my head down a filthy toilet, forcing my fingers down my throat and gagging up sustenance my body desperately needed. I didn't have a trip sitter, didn't have anyone within a 15-mile radius who could help me if it all went wrong. And I was too goddamn naive to even realise it could go that wrong. Curious as the cat that died, carefree as the fool, I ate the box of shrooms, then settled down on the computer to listen to music and surf LiveJournal, catching up on my friends' navel-gazings and general doings over the weekend away. Half an hour later, I was listening to Colony 5's Fusion, and over that trippy quicksand-shifting backbeat, I misheard the lyrics "I'm love in disguise" as "I'm loving the skies." I glanced on autopilot out of the window, and it was true. I realized some surreal god had parted the clouds just for me. I'm loving the skies. The grey sky was split down the center, a gorgeous golden spotlight of sunshine pouring down on the world below, and my breath was taken clean away by the beauty of the world. I would never, ever see clouds the same again, not for the rest of my life. To this very day, I half crash my car when the clouds do something amazing. Their vastness, depth, and shapes were truly shown to me that day, and I can never unsee it. Grinning widely, I typed out a quick entry reporting the crazy godhole in the sky and the consumption of nice things from Amsterdam. Almost immediately afterwards, though, the music started to feel wrong. Everything was starting to feel wrong. I changed the music, then changed it again, but it didn't matter what I put on. It all threw me off balance. Everything was too loud, too dark, too daunting, but silence was equally uncomfortable. I escaped the computer, went downstairs to see my dog. Animals were good while you're tripping, right? Turns out, not so much. Not when you're talking about a perpetually manic, very loud, rather large border collie cross schnauzer who jumped all over me, barking at maximum volume, and I fled again, back upstairs to curl up in bed and try to calm down. But I couldn't calm down. It wasn't just the silence, it was the discomfort. However I lay, it felt as though gravity was crushing me, from my head to my internal organs. Every breath felt like an effort. Every heartbeat felt like death as I was being crushed from head to toe by the very air. I know now that these ghastly side effects are known as the body load, and it's the reason a lot of people flat out do not get on with mushrooms. I suspect being autistic makes it all the more likely you'll suffer this effect if you ever dabble. We're far more tuned in to the sensations of our own bodies, and on shrooms, it can be impossible to tune it out, which is, at a guess, what the body load already is. On hallucinogens, your brain processes everything differently. The weight of gravity is a feeling that is always there, but you have no conscious memory of experiencing it. Your brain has grown used to tuning it out, like a pervasive, constant smell, or a tinnitus ear ringing, or simply the feeling of having feet. But on shrooms, if there are no distractions, this heavy, crushing sensation can become the only thing you perceive. And it is beyond description horrible. I lay in my bed on the verge of freaking out completely. I could literally feel it, that I was hanging on by the single stretchy thread of one hair, and if that hair snapped, I would just start screaming and convulsing like a possessed maniac. What the fuck would that achieve apart from scaring me even worse? So I held on with everything I had. I got out of bed, tried to change the vibe. I lay in literally every bed in the house, and pretty soon our wise old cat had cottoned on to the fact that I wasn't okay. Tessa started following me everywhere I went, even climbing up the wooden ladder to my bed and curling up right next to my face. Stroking her soft black fur, hearing the rhythm of her purring, it was a comforting marker of time passing. A reminder that time was actually passing and that eventually this hellish shit would be over. But lying there in total stillness and silence, but for the purring of one small black and white cat, my brain started thinking, accelerating hard. The shrooms were dragging me into a 5-hour introspective nightmare that would change me forever. I saw it all. My eating disorder, saw how I'd been in Amsterdam with Ash, eating like a normal person, having energy, laughing and talking and smoking and living. Then I'd come back here to this empty house where I had to survive by myself. And I was 20 years old, a fucking adult. I should be capable of the most basic life skill by now, surviving, feeding myself in a house that was fully pre-packaged with a multitude of foodstuffs. But instead of behaving like an adult human, my survival skills were more pathetic and ridiculous than that of the average 5-year-old. That 5-year-old left alone at home would have climbed onto a chair, grabbed some cereal and eaten a bowl, then moved the fuck on with their life. No big deal. Whereas I, a 20-year-old adult, left alone for a single week, had instead chosen to perform a bizarre, fucked-up ritual with the vital, sacred resource of food, throwing thousands of calories into my starved stomach, then forcibly retching it all back up again into the toilet. I was spending so much money, time, and health on essentially gargling my food. Food that so many people the world over were literally dying for. And for what? Does it make you happy? The severe god of the mushrooms asked. Does this shit actually make you happy? The answer was a clear, resounding no. I'd been depressed since the age of 8. The only times I was happy now were when I was on ecstasy. And the shrooms dealt me another hammer blow of brutal logic. You are never, ever going to be happy again, they said. Not like this. It's physically impossible. Your brain is a delicate, brilliant machine, but you haven't bothered putting fuel in it for years, and now you genuinely expect it to produce the right chemicals? You go to therapy and whine on and on about your problems, wondering why it isn't working. But it's you who keeps denying the fuel, gargling the fuel that would take all your problems away. I started to see it, how utterly fucking stupid I'd been. The world was vast and amazing and full of beautiful things. Hadn't Amsterdam proved that? Hadn't Glastonbury Festival proved that when I was just 15 years old and all this shit began? Hadn't every place I'd ever travelled to made me happier? But instead of seeing all those wonders, I'd reduced my life to a single barren cell. My consciousness was imprisoned within this body. I could feel it with every aching breath. Then there was no denying the miseries or joys produced by this inescapable fleshmobile. The analogy spun out, spun on. If I just put fucking fuel in the tank of this machine, this body that was the only way I had of travelling the earthly realm, I could go to Disneyland, metaphorically speaking. I could go anywhere, see anything, and would I be happy then? Maybe. Maybe not. But there was a chance, a bloody good one at that. But instead of taking that chance, my only chance, I'd let my car run dry, kicked in its tyres, set it on fire, and here I was, trapped inside the stark, blank-walled prison of my own mind, forever. And I was seriously wondering why I wasn't happy? I felt like the most gigantic moron on the planet. Ash and I had had endless conversations about the pursuit of happiness. If you gave Ash one wish, he'd always said, he'd just wish for happiness, because you never knew the route that might take you there, the ingredients you needed. But happiness itself was the meaning of life, the purpose of living. My own mum, she said and still says it all the time, all I ever wanted was for you to be happy. It was what I thought I wanted more than anything on earth, and yet I'd made it completely impossible for my brain to ever achieve that state. On and on I whined about it, in person, in real life, in therapy, my lack of happiness, when all along it was me standing in the way of my own life with these stupid, disgusting, ridiculous rituals of food, gargling, and self-deprivation. Yes, said the Shrooms. You are literally being stupider than a 5-year-old child. Let that sink in. It fucking sank in. It sank in for hour upon hour upon hour as we lay on the bed, Tessa purring softly, me writhing beneath the crushing weight of gravity and harsh realisations, till finally it was time to feed Presley, and I crawled out of bed, went downstairs, gave him his bowl of dog food, then got out the sofa bed and put on black books. I had emerged from the worst of the trip now, but I felt shell-shocked, shaken hollow, like all my insides had been taken out, scrubbed clean with bleach and a Brillo pad, then violently reinserted. I remember seeing the episode where Manny gets locked in the bookshop and begins to identify as a lonely little soldier, surviving solo on the front line, frying wasps over a candle for miserable sustenance while cocooned in a blanket and singing woefully to himself. I related hard. I'd never felt so alone in my entire life, and the fact I now knew it was all my own doing only made it harder to bear. I had just enough brain cells to roast some butternut squash. I guess this was my first meal of recovery. Why I didn't phone Ash at any point during that hellish day is beyond me. He would have been there, would have talked me down, probably even come straight over. But stupid me, I felt like I'd burdened him enough this weekend. I also felt, during the worst of it, that if I spoke anything aloud, I would lose my shit completely and just start screaming and screaming forever. I called Ash the next day, though, practically pleaded with him to come over, and of course he said yes. He always would have said yes. I never told him about the eating disorder stuff, but I told him all about the gravity and how Tessa had saved me from a genuine screaming freakout. Ash got that. He'd always been a cat person. Presley scared him shitless, but he did his best, and the dog liked him regardless, lovingly piling up a whole stack of his favourite balls and bones next to Ash's leg, then waiting expectantly for one to be tossed back. That day, though, the day after the shrooms, I acted on what I'd learned. If you'd been there, if you'd been inside my head for those 8 slow-motion hours of the harshest, most bluntly delivered therapy ever, you'd get it. You'd understand. There was no way on earth I could continue to delude myself. Therapy was never going to work. Nothing was going to work until I started eating like a sane human. So that's what I did. I upped my calories to 1,500 a day, still 500 under the recommended daily allowance, but far more than I had been eating, and certainly enough for a fairly sedentary female to thrive on. I gained a little weight, but not enough to freak me out too hard, and the urge to binge purge rapidly evaporated. Pretty soon, I actually was happy. Not just on the weekends, not just when I was high, but most of the time. Even when I was sad, it was just sadness. It wasn't depression. Depression is a sadness so intense it physically hurts, knocks the wind right out of you, makes it impossible to move beneath its black iron weight. Once I started eating, and carried on raving, admittedly, that feeling was gone for me. Those shrooms truly were golden teachers. They cured me in a single day, but would I ever put myself through that again for another problem? The answer to that is a resounding fuck no. You'd have to pay me a literal £1 billion to relive that ungodly day, let alone to eat another mound of the foul-tasting things and face some new inner demon. If you trip on the regular for therapeutic reasons and have experiences like I did, I think you're the ballsiest motherfucker alive, especially if you experience the body load issues that make every breath a heaving agony. Admittedly, that wasn't the only time I would do shrooms, not by far, but it was the only time I dared to raw dog them without the padding of ecstasy. Taken like that, with ecstasy, there's no body load. None. Nothing but a magical, magical experience. And speaking of those magical times, now that I was eating, living, smiling, there were so many of them, right around the corner, right through the door. Specifically through the bedroom door of a brand new boy. one who lived amongst a scene every bit as riotous, passionate, and drug-spangled as Reuben's crew. I didn't know his name yet, but he definitely knew mine. At the age of 27, Luke had already bedded well over 100 women. Apparently, I'd become the fresh target his dick was pointing at. He didn't realize it, though. For once in his life, he wasn't being led by his dick. He was led by his heart. And that heart, well, I swear I didn't mean to destroy it. And that's where we're ending this chapter for now, and I can't wait to introduce you to Luke, my next boyfriend. Another fake name, obviously, but all the magical times that we had together was an interesting time. But yes, this chapter, I apologize if you felt called out at any point through the shroom trip scenes. That was literally the lessons I learned raw and uncut, and it was brutal. I had to tell it in quite a brutal way because it was brutal. Like, the shrooms may well have been labelled golden teachers, but dude, they were not kind teachers. They were brutal teachers. And those lessons were battered and battered and battered into my head. Like, time slows down when you're tripping. So even though, like, you trip for like 5-8 hours, something like that, but it feels like about 3 days, day and night is what it feels like. And those lessons just go round and round and round your head. And I just couldn't get over the two things. The first thing, a 5-year-old would be able to take care of themselves in this empty house. And what the fuck are you doing as an adult? Like, your survival skills are worse than that of a 5-year-old. Doesn't that make you feel dumb? And then the second one was the typical kind of mushroom perspective that, you know, your body is your vehicle on this plane of existence. You are a soul in a body. You can only experience things as this locked in soul. You have to experience through your body. This is your car. That's all it is. It's just a car. Would you take care of your car if you wanted to go places? Of course you would. You want to go places. You want to see your friends. You want to have a nice time. That's how you're happy. But if you just set fire to your car, you're going to be stuck at home. And of course you're going to be miserable. And this was kind of the lesson that I learned. I went round and round and round. And like I said, the gravity effect, like the body load, it was so uncomfortable the whole time. I was just shut in with my thoughts. And it was horrible, man. It was horrible. Like I say, I have told this story before. I did make a video back in 2018 called The Shroom Trip that cured my eating disorder, but I feel like I didn't talk about just how bloody awful that shroom trip was. That yes, it did amazing things, and I think if you're interested in stories like this about hallucinogens and the kind of therapeutic effects, I always really recommend the channel Psyched Substance, because Adam is someone who trips a lot for therapeutic reasons, but he has a lot of terrible experiences while tripping, and yet he still goes back because of the benefits. And I think he has balls of steel, that man, to go through experiences like I do, but then to keep going back and doing it, because I know that a shroom trip would probably do me a lot of good in my life. Like, that there are issues, you know, that I still have, that probably if I did shrooms now, I would probably have to confront them, and I would probably come out of them with realizations and change my life overnight like I did with the eating disorder. But dude, I'm sorry, no. I ain't got it in me. I ain't got it in me. I'm 36 now. I'm not the ballsy, naive, clueless 20-year-old I was. I don't throw myself into things headlong like that anymore. And honestly, having had 2 nervous breakdowns, I don't know that it's honestly a great idea anyway for me to do shrooms at this point, like, because they can damage as well as doing good. You know, again, as I've said before, this is not my story to tell, therefore I cannot tell it because it's very dark. But I knew someone personally who, through overuse of hallucinogens, had an experience so bad they did something unbelievably terrible, irrevocable, and it ruined their life forever. When you've known someone personally who like hallucinogens have done that to, you have to respect them. Like for me, hallucinogens are the drug I respect beyond all others. Like if you know my backstory, I've done all manner of really dangerous things with class A drugs, including intravenous heroin and coke. And yeah, I have huge respect for hallucinogens. I fear hallucinogens far more than I fear heroin. Like, and maybe that's screwed up, but I feel like, yeah, the potential to do harm with hallucinogens is huge under the wrong circumstances. And I was very lucky that they did me good, considering the circumstances I did them in, with no trip sitter, having done no research, not knowing about set and setting, not knowing how to cure a bad trip, having no trip stoppers like pills with me, like Valium or anything to stop the trip. I had to go through it. I didn't have anyone to look after me. It could have gone disastrously wrong. You get people in situations like that, and sometimes they can end up killing themselves to get out of that situation. So if you ever do try and do hallucinogens for therapeutic reasons or any other reasons, for God's sake, do your research and please have a trip sitter with you, or at least like on standby, on call, ready for you if you need them. But anyway, if you would like to see the next chapter as soon as you can and uncensored and without adverts and all of that stuff, my Patreon is always linked below, and for just $2 you can become a Patreon person and get these chapters as soon as possible without any censorship or adverts and all of that stuff. And with that said, I am going to shut up and hope you are all well, and if you are dealing with eating disordered stuff, I hope you find the kapow moment that brings you to recovery, whatever that is. Like, obviously in my case it was quite a weird kapow moment. Honestly, I feel like that holiday, even if I hadn't have done shrooms immediately afterwards, that holiday, it put a lot of those thoughts first in my mind. The fact that I had to be normal around Ash, the fact that I felt peer pressured into being normal, and peer pressure actually can be very, very healthy with eating disorders, I find. And this continues on in the next chapter, that around Luke and his gang, peer pressure and my eating disorder really clashed. That there was just no way they were letting me get away with this shit without serious peer pressure. And so that there is more to the recovery. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm done. As I say, I was still eating like a rigid 1,500 calories a day at this point. So I was still quite strongly controlling my food. I was still quite markedly underweight. And it was really meeting Luke and hanging out with Luke and his gang that kind of popped the final things for me and really made me chill about food again, and taught me how to eat like a normal person. So there's more to say. And anyway, this is long, so I'm going to shut up. Thank you for listening. Over and out. Bye bye.